From the land of frozen lakes, this is 10,000 Takes, brought to you by Minnesota Score Radio. Wally and Eric back for yet another week as we slice and dice the always busy, always topical, super saturated Minnesota sports scene. And Wally, it's yet another episode of 10K Takes Television, and the dominant topic. It's really dwarfed everything else here in the upper Midwest the past few days. We lose Bud Grant, the icon, and certainly the face of a franchise, the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, and I think that he embodies what people think in Minnesota of themselves, not just as a Minnesota Viking, but as Minnesotans. I mean, you know, the stoic look, the outdoorsman, the cold weather, you know, all that stuff that you kind of learned about him as a head coach and because of his, you know, coaching style and what he did for the Minnesota Vikings. But I think that Minnesotans kind of look at that and say, yeah, that's who we are.
I think you're right. And beyond the borders of Minnesota,
no doubt,
I think that's what people, you know, out west, down south, out east think of Minnesota, at least those who were around when Bud Grant was a head coach, that, hey, he's Minnesota. He's the frozen tundra. He's the Iceman. I mean, he's stoic, and he stands there on the sidelines. He doesn't have gloves on. He doesn't care about the temperature. He is hardy. He is battle-tested. He's a four-wheel drive football coach. Any kind of weather, he will succeed in it.
Yeah, and then at the age of 88, he just proved it all over again back in 2016. Vikings in that playoff game at TCF Bank Stadium in Minneapolis. The, 2 or 3 seasons they were outside while the new stadium was being built. And Bud walks onto the field to do the coin flip in shirt sleeves. He had a golf shirt on, and the temperature was like, 25, 30 below wind chill.
It was snapshot in time.
No doubt. Yeah. Absolutely what you think of when you think of Bud Grant. And he wanted that exactly the way it played out.
Yeah,
too.
And he really was the perfect coach at the perfect time for the Minnesota Vikings when they were outside in the NF elements, as I like to call it. And beyond that, pre-free agency. So he and Jim Finks assembled a core of incredible players, Hall of Fame talent on that team. They went to 4 Super Bowls, and they didn't have any freedom to move and go somewhere else. Bud got the most out of those guys, and boy, did he value durability. I don't know if he could coach in today's sports where you have load management and guys going into bubble rooms and nap rooms and being coddled. I don't think that would work for Bud.
No, it wouldn't. And we'll talk to some guys who knew all about Bud Grant, guys that played for him, coming up.
This is 10K Takes, your purple ticket.
Nice Rink makes it easy and affordable to create your own outdoor rink. We're hockey players ourselves and spent the last quarter century perfecting the Nice Rink system for the skating community. It is truly engineered to be simple and affordable. Visit nicerink.com now or call us at 1-888-NICE-RINK to order. Spend less, get more.
I've been meaning to give you these for many years. I think they're perfect.
Maya?
Oh, I love your earring. Why didn't you try these?
It isn't just about vision. It's about care. Nobody cares for eyes more than Pearl.
"10,000 Takes" continues, and we're talking about the passing of Bud Grant on today's show primarily. And who better than talk about it than maybe the greatest running back in Minnesota Vikings history? Certainly was during the Bud Grant era. Chuck Foreman joining us now. And Chuck, Bud Grant, your head coach, he knew how to get the best out of his players. He knew how to get the best out of Chuck Foreman. What strikes you when you first think about Bud Grant as the head coach?
First of all, when you first look at him, you're trying to figure out what he's thinking, and you can't because you get that stoic look, and didn't smile or he didn't let you know anything, but he knew everything as far as football goes, and he knew his personnel. So I wouldn't call it intimidating at all, but I would call it I don't know what word I could actually put on Bud just to really describe him other than hey, it's only one of them. That is for sure. He was um, a man of stature. Let's put it like that.
Yeah.
And Chuck, long before Bill Walsh and that West Coast offense in San Francisco, you guys had the
Yeah,
purple offense, Bud and Jerry Burns, and they got the ball to you in space. So you ran the ball well and you caught it well. You were a trailblazer back, but that was really the evolution of that offense, wasn't it?
it certainly was. And unfortunately for us, in my time, when they evaluate a fullback, running back, in my time anyway, they just evaluated them by how many yards from the line of scrimmage. Anything else you did was like a non-issue. But like I said before, that was a major part of what made us different and what made us special. The fact that you did have a runner receiver and nobody else had it and nobody else could do it or nobody else tried to do it like we did it. So, and then they all of a sudden it came out one day that it was the West Coast offense. Well, we all know where it started.
Yeah. Something you said to me the other day when you and I were talking, and I really found this pretty profound with regard to Bud. We all know that he knew football, of course. But you said to me you thought that he was like a psychologist on the field and off. Your thought,
Right.
where did you come up with that? Why?
Because he knew what buttons to push to motivate each of his players. Some players he knew he just needed just to stay away from and just let them do what they do. I was one of those. So was Alan Page and several other ones. And then there was other ones, he could talk just softly to get them motivated. And then other ones he had to put a fire in them to get them going. But he knew every one of his players and what it took to get them to play the best that they could play. He had a unique ability like that.
Chuck, your team had a mystique of thriving on the frozen tundra at the old Met. How
Mm-hmm.
did Bud get a guy like you who played at Miami, grew up in Maryland, Fran Tarkenton, who played at Georgia, Ranieri is from SoCal.
Right.
How did he get you guys to buy into this North Pole type, weather you guys played it?
Well, you should tell that story. I think I told you guys about the Eskimos on the machine, on the road graders, and they could stay up there for hours and hours, and then people from the lower states would come up and try to do the same thing. They can only last 10 minutes. The Eskimos or whatever could do it for hours and hours, and then they ran tests on both, and they were the same. And the only thing that they could figure out was the Eskimo knew he was going to be cold. He accepted the fact that he was going to be cold, and therefore he was going to do his job in the cold regardless. Now, to me, when I heard that story, I'm like, I don't know if I believe that. I said, there were no blacks up there, right? You know, that was Rick. That was Ricky. That was somebody else said that, but that was one of the questions that came out of the group. And so, but no, but the bottom line is we practiced in it. We did all the things necessary, to be able to work in that environment, and he was responsible for that. So we stayed out. I know for me, when I first got up here as a rookie, we were ready to play our first a playoff game, and it was going to be 20-30 below zero. At the end of practice, he kept me out, and he was throwing the football at me. Didn't say anything. He just picked up the ball and started throwing it at me, and he was throwing it at me. I was throwing it back at him, and he was throwing. I was throwing it back at him harder and harder because I was, getting mad that he was having me out there. And I came inside, and Oscar Reed says, "Well, you got the Bud treatment, huh?" I said, "Well, he said, don't be mad." I said, "Well, you went in and out." And then he says, "Chuck, he was getting you ready for the game. He was seeing whether you could concentrate enough to catch that ball in that cold weather. It was cold." So, but yeah, he had a way of doing things when you didn't think he was doing things, and he had this little, I don't know, this little smile type of thing. It wasn't a big smile, but he had his way of getting his way of getting what he wanted you to do across.
When you first heard that you're not supposed to wear gloves, you're not supposed to have hand warmers, you're not going to have heaters
Right.
on the sideline, you came in from the University of Miami. What went through your head?
I thought they were crazy.
Yeah,
That's what I figured.
How's that going to be? But there was some sense in the practicing the way you had to play. But there's one thing, so one day, before the cold came, there were these little packets in my locker, and I didn't know what they were. This is before the game, and I came in the game, and they were these little packets. And then I saw a couple of guys breaking them and putting them in their pants, putting them in where their belt was in their pants. And I'm like, I wonder what that is. So I broke one, and it was some kind of substance in this pack that it made the packet warm, so you could put your fingertips down in there, and your fingertips could stay warm. So he had some tricks up his bag, up his sleeve to help us, in that weather.
Chuck, you played in 3 Super Bowls. Bud coached in 4. Vikings never won one. I remember that last Super Bowl loss against Oakland in '77. You had tears coming down your cheeks. I mean, you were
Right.
visibly upset. Bud said these Super Bowl losses never bothered him. They never defined him. Did you believe that?
I don't know if it defined him, but it certainly affected me. So it may not have. I know what it took to get there. I know the commitment that it took. I knew the talent that it took. I knew all that and the hard work you had to put in to get there. So it affected me. And now Bud's a whole different story. It may not have. And if he said he didn't, it didn't. But it definitely, especially after that last one, we were an older team too. So, you weren't going to get that many more chances at that, to get back to the Super Bowl. And after that Super Bowl, we didn't play as well to get back.
Chuck, you mentioned that you heard different ways of him to motivate his players throughout time that you had with the Vikings. What was a Bud Grant halftime or post-game speech like? Or were there any Bud Grant post-game speeches?
There wasn't really that much of a speech afterwards of "way to go, guys" or something like that. The guy that said the most was Jerry Burns, and of course that was X-rated. So I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you all the stuff he said, but he gave you his compliments in his own way, and certainly complimented you when you did well. And when we played, he was proud of his team. That's for sure.
Good stuff, Chuck.
Chuck, good stuff as usual. And I know that a lot of your former teammates thinking a lot of the same things these days. Appreciate you spending it with us.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Here's Chuck Foreman, maybe the greatest Viking of all time in the running back position. Should be in the Hall of Fame right here on 10,000 Takes. More after this. Stay with us.
Taxes don't have to be taxing, not with Keller Tax Service. For over 20 years, Linda Keller has prepared taxes for all types of professions and businesses. She has perfected the virtual tax appointment through phone or video. With Keller Tax Service, you never leave home. Call Keller Tax Service at 320-352-0013 or check out Keller Tax Service online at kellertaxservice.com. Take the anxiety out of taxes with Keller Tax Service at kellertaxservice.com.
Welcome back, and we continue now our discussion about the passing of Bud Grant and talking to some of his former players. And you and I have had a chance to talk to several over the last few days. Now we're going to get a chance to talk to Stu Voigt. He played for Bud from 1970 to 1980, of course, tight end for the Minnesota Vikings in that time. Stu, first of all, when you heard the news, your first thoughts?
A little bit shocked. We had just been together. We had an NFL alumni charity dinner at the Omni Hotel owned by the Wilfs right at the Vikings complex. And, I knew he was going to turn 96, I think, in May. So he was in a wheelchair. But it's the 50-year anniversary of the 73 Super Bowl team. So Bud, myself, Chuck Foreman, and Carl Eller got up and gave some little reminiscings about the game. And he was very lucid, very funny. He had a couple of one-liners, and I had a couple of one-liners, and seemed to be enjoying himself. So, in fact, I think I remarked to somebody at the table. I was sitting with Mark Mullaney and Foreman and Carl Eller, and I said, gee, I bet he lives to be 100 years old. And here, a week later, I get a call out at Newport Beach that he had passed away. So I was shocked, saddened. But I want to say it's kind of changed over the last day or so that I would say Bud Grant lived about as full a life as anybody could ever have. He did things every day, and he taught me one lesson. He says, about retirement, and I'm going to be 75 here in another couple of months. He says, you got to get up and have something to do every day. And I will bet that Bud Grant, every day he got up, had something to do. Could have been hunting, could have been fishing, always had an office at the Viking facility where he was, I'm sure he was kind of the elder statesman that had come for advice on how to do this and how to do that. I'm sure the head coach and they're all young guys said, hey, we can pick the brain of Bud Grant and really come up with some gems. And I'm sure they did. And I think he enjoyed that. And over the years was a racquetball partner and opponent of Bud for years and knew the family. He had the tragic death of one of his sons here. Bruce died lately, maybe a year or so ago. And of course he lost his wife, but he always kept a stiff upper lip, to be sure, but always a positive attitude. And I think that's I'll always take away from Bud. So I'm sad, but boy, what a life he led and what a guy he was.
And Stu, you know this better than anybody. He did not micromanage. He wasn't like, say, Dick Vermeil or George Allen. And I'm not knocking those guys. They were very successful in their own right. But Bud was a 9-to-5 coach. He wasn't obsessed with the game. He just wanted smart, talented players who had a knack for A, durability, and B, making plays when they had to. Wasn't that one of his greatest strengths, just defining roles and letting you guys do your thing?
Well, absolutely. I think you're right, Eric. You know what he also said, if you can't get your work done, I don't know what the time was, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night, you don't have to stay overnight and sleep in your office and all that. Then you're doing something wrong. And he would leave. He was still a family guy. And, he had that patient, common sense approach to coaching, which I think too many coaches, obviously when you're losing or a losing streak or things aren't going well, you tend to hit that, react and overreact and kind of hit the panic button. Boy, a guy that never panicked was Bud Grant. And I don't think he was, I think he was, obviously a good X and O coach, but his forte is he delegated. I mean, he was kind of a coaching tree himself. I think Neil Armstrong, Bob Holloway, Jack Patera, Jerry Burns, Pete Carroll came through the system. I mean, he coached the coaches and they moved on. He had no problem with that. And I think I don't think he's a dinosaur of coaches yet, although he, things, the NFL different today than it was way back when, but put a real premium on veteran players. If you still had some gas in the tank and would be willing to get in shape, he knew you weren't going to make mistakes and you could come through even the most, serious, situations during a game and you wouldn't choke. And so as a result, you saw guys like Jim Marshall probably played 19 years with the Vikings. Eller probably 15 or 16. The Studwell maybe 14 or 15. Paul Krause. He put a real value on guys that had been there before, and when it happened again, they'd be ready to go. And I think that was one of his strengths. And I'm not sure because of salary caps and all these things that happen today that would be in vogue. But as far as I was concerned, he really got the most out of his players.
When you first showed up as a rookie out of the University of Wisconsin and you walked onto that playing field for the first time, what was your first interaction with Bud Grant?
Well, it probably wasn't even that year. It was probably a couple of years later. Bud was a man of, and in fact, I used to joke that when I finally got entrenched there after a couple of years, these guys would run up coming to training camp for the first time, and there was Bud Grant. They wanted to say hello, and he was not a guy to say hello. He was not a guy to, shoot the bull with young players. He'd kind of give them that look. He, as I remarked the other night, he had that look of the, like James Arness from Gunsmoke or one of these Clint Eastwood from A Fistful of Dollars. He'd just give him that steely-eyed look and go like, oh, hello. I don't have to shake. I think in fact, he told one guy, "I'm not going to shake your hand every day, am I?" And put the guys in the place. But if they earn their spot sooner or later, and produced, boy, people, I'm sure not. I'm not the first guy to say, boy, I'm a fan of Bud Grant's. I think the Paul Krauses and the Chuck Foremans and the Carl Ellers, and don't worry, we had high-profile, high ego players even in those days, but he handled those. He delegated a lot, not just to the coaches, but I think Mick Tingeloff and Grady Alderman on the offense and Jim Marshall on the defense, they handled the little bitty problems. Bud, there was always guys that, let's face it, maybe drank too much or missed a curfew or got a speeding ticket or had a little problems. He had his way to seem to, keep an even flow, and we got through those things. And I can't imagine in the 11 years I played that there was too many problems. Obviously, people want more money and people want more playing time, but Bud handled that. And I think that's one of the keys for his success, that the longevity came with, he also said with players, there is no ability without durability. You like guys that would come out every week. You're not out of the starting lineup because you got a sore toe or maybe that hamstring's a little tight. Man, I can't remember anybody that ever do that. You just put a little tape on it, or rubbed a little dirt on it, and you got out there and played. Tape an aspirin on it,
No load management then, huh?
No, gosh, that sounds like I'm talking about something that happened in the dark ages, but
And he really was a less is more guy, Stu. I remember vividly, as a passionate fan when I was a kid, being at that Mud Bowl in 1977 at the LA Coliseum when it rained all day and it was a quagmire. You couldn't see the numbers on the Rams or Vikings jerseys. But Bud knew in the first quarter you could throw the ball because after that the conditions would deteriorate. Your team jumped out to a 14-0 lead. I remember Chuck Foreman scoring a touchdown in that game. And the Rams could not get that coveted win at home. They thought they had you guys out there in SoCal and they couldn't do it.
Eric, you're exactly right there. And I got to say, I think that was 77 or 78. What was it? And we were a little bit past our prime. But that game, they were the better team. We got ahead, and by the third and fourth quarter, it was a mud bowl, and you just stand up and kind of lean on each other and fall down, and nothing could happen. And we went on. I think we got beat the next week by the Cowboys at Dallas. But those things. He was one of those coaches. You're right. It reminds me of the time he would stick his finger up the air, and the wind's going to change there by halftime, so we'll do this. And you're looking at him, go like, how does this guy know that? And it would always happen.
Last question for you. If you had one takeaway from Bud Grant in your time with him, both as a player and then since retirement for both of you, what would that be?
Well, it happened the other night, in fact. It was kind of funny. They bring us up on stage at this NFL alumni charity dinner, and it was Foreman, Eller, myself, and Bud. And Bud tells the story, which is true to an extent, that my dad was the head of the DNR in Wisconsin, and Bud has a place in Wisconsin, in Gordon, Wisconsin. And he was saying, well, he went to my dad after one of the Super Bowls and said, good young player, but, geez, I hope he can hang on here. And he said, I'd really like my lake stocked full of fish. And, I think my dad might have done it. I don't think that's under the table or whatever, but I grabbed the microphone back and I told my dad, not only stock it with fish, put in a couple sailfish and a marlin, maybe a grouper. Who cares if they float to the top in another week or so? And I saw that little smile on Bud's face, and he goes like, yeah. He knew that I got the message, and my dad got the message. And my dad said, yeah, no problem. We'll, whatever they were putting in there, walleye or muskies or something. But Bud wasn't afraid to ask for the order. He knew the value of $1, and he pushed that, and he had some fun. And he also knew that, hey, I'm Bud Grant. I wield a pretty good hammer here. So
Well, Stu, we appreciate you spending some time with us and talking about Bud Grant and, of course, your time with the Minnesota Vikings. And hopefully we'll talk to you again down the road when the NFL season kicks off again late
Absolutely,
summer.
guys. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. He is Stu Voigt, played for the Vikings back in the 70s and into 1980, right here on 10,000 Takes. Back with more after this.
I've been meaning to give you these for many years. I think they're perfect.
Maya?
Oh, I love your earrings. Why didn't you try these?
It isn't just about vision, it's about care. Nobody cares for eyes more than Pearl.
Nice Rink makes it easy and affordable to create your own outdoor rink. We're hockey players ourselves and spent the last quarter century perfecting the Nice Rink system for the skating community. It is truly engineered to be simple and affordable. Visit nicerink.com now or call us at 1-888-NICE-RINK to order. Spend less, get more.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of 10K Takes Television. We continue to reflect on Bud Grant, the Hall of Fame head coach, and just a legendary sports figure here in Minnesota, the upper Midwest. Let's not forget about Manitoba, where he won those 4 Grey Cups with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He got a statue up there.
Or the University of Minnesota, where he lettered in football, basketball, and baseball. Or his time with the Minneapolis Lakers. I mean, how many people realize that this is the only guy in the history of the NFL and the NBA to play in both of those leagues? Nobody else has ever done that.
Yeah, pretty amazing. He was Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, Dave Winfield, all those guys way before their time, right?
Yeah, it is amazing. And then he takes this to the next level as a head coach and goes to 4 Super Bowls with the Minnesota Vikings. So, just an incredible life lived, as Stu Voigt put it. He really lived a full life and accomplished a lot, and he will not soon be forgotten, that's for sure. So my final thoughts on Bud as we wrap up this week's show. I had a couple of opportunities. One, I got a call. This was in the mid-'90s when Jim Finks was put into the Hall of Fame. And I got the opportunity to go and sit down, do a one-on-one interview with Bud, talking about Jim Finks. I was invited into his office in Eden Prairie. That office, oh, by the way, that he negotiated when he came back the second time as head coach in 1985. He said, okay, I'm coming back, but this is what I want. He wanted a lifetime contract to have an office at Winter Park, and he got it. And Bud showed up there all the time. And so I got the chance to go there. His name is on the door. You walk in. He had, the paraphernalia and the pictures of him hunting and all that stuff. And you look out the window, and there's his deer feeder out back. It was classic Bud. He was congenial. He was everything that I thought he was. And he was very, very nice. I was a little worried. I mean, you're a little intimidated by Bud Grant, right? But no, he was great. And I'm glad that I got that opportunity to sit down with, clearly a legend in Minnesota and one of the greats of all time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say to Bud Grant, thank you. Thank you for an incredible amount of snapshots when I was a young fan. And I wasn't even in Minnesota at the time. I was out there in SoCal. And the rivalry between the LA Rams and the Minnesota Vikings back then was special. And it was heated. But I gravitated to that team, and Bud was the straw that stirred the drink. Yeah. He and Jim Finks assembled all that great talent, all those fabulous players, and year in, year out, they were winning divisions, they were winning playoff games, they were going to 4 Super Bowls. If you were a fan of the Minnesota Vikings back then, it was clearly the apex. It was the heyday. There was nothing like it, and there never will be again unless that team goes back outside.
Not going to happen.
Just saying it.
I know.
Because they haven't been in a Super Bowl since.
Yeah.
And on that note, we got to go. We'll FedEx out our thank yous. One goes to David Weld, Rocky, Stu Voigt, Chuck Foreman. For Wally, I'm Eric saying so long. This is 10K Takes, your sports ticket.